We are here with a friend, Dr. Yaakov Freedman, who is a board-certified psychiatrist with a private practice in Jerusalem. He's the former chief resident of inpatient psychiatry at the Harvard Longwood Psychiatry Residency Training Program, and a friend and someone who has been on SoulWords on our program here recently. In fact, it wasn't so recently. I was just looking back at it. It was right before Pesach, and we were talking about Passover and those holidays. And now here we are in the days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, to the New Year. So we decided, let's have the conversation again. Dr. Freedman, thank you for joining us.
Rebbe, thanks so much for having me. I'm working on being a soul brother, so I guess being on SoulWords helps with that. And if the Melech is in the field, then Dr. Freedman is back on SoulWords with Rabbi Taub. So it's mamish a pleasure to be.
It's a pleasure for me as well. Okay, so let's just jump straight into it. As I prefaced the last time that we spoke, I'm a rabbi. I am not a mental health professional. That is not my training. That's not my background. However, because of the way that I learn Torah and the way that I teach Torah, I do end up confronting a lot of the inner conflicts and the struggles that I as a person and that people I study with as people go through. And because of that, there are a lot of issues that I think for most people sort of in maybe in the modern world we would term these psychological issues. Okay, now you're the expert, you are a psychiatrist, you are trained in this field, and I defer to you in all of these matters. And it's sort of for me very well, it's a good feeling to just be able to say, because normally I say, well, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, don't ask me. But now I can't say, don't ask me. What I can say is, ask Dr. Freedman. So I want to throw something at you, and I want to get your take on this. So during this time of year, a lot of people are stressed. And they are stressed because of the pressure of the upcoming high holidays. And there are various reasons for that, but for now, I just want to focus on one source of that pressure: the guilt and the feeling of inadequacy and the fear of judgment. And I know you're an observant Jew, a God-fearing Jew. Thank God, you have the psychiatric background, but you're also, a lot of times people who have the clinical background aren't versed in or even sympathetic to the religious part of it. What would you say to a religious Jew who takes the high holidays very seriously, doesn't want to stop taking the high holidays very seriously, but they're sensing that the stress that they're feeling is just not productive and not healthy? What do you say to that?
So, Harav, the fact that we're talking about this is fantastic to begin with. Again, we don't have a solution unless we have a problem. We don't have a problem unless we talk about it. I think that I should start off with the caveat. You were allowed to say, Doc, you know about psychiatry. I'm a Rebbe. That's not my tehum. So I have to be very clear. I am not a Rebbe. There's a lot of amaratzis happening over here. It's nothing that I'm embarrassed about. I know my tehum, and I'm grateful in the same sense that I have a kesher with you to help me better understand the neshama and the halacha of the situations that I face on a daily basis in my office here in Yerushalayim. What do we do with people who are very stressed out by Tishrei, by Rosh Hashanah, by Yom Kippur, by Sukkot, by Slichos, the intensity of needing to do tshuva? It could be a great thing. A lot of us need to do tshuva. I know I have a lot of tshuva to do. Big apologies to my father and mother-in-law if they're listening right now. They know what I'm talking about. Anyways, we all have work to do. So yeah, a lot of it is rational. We all want to be better people. So a lot of that is rational. We all want to connect to God on a very deep level. A lot of that is rational. With this in mind, in the same sense, it can get very overwhelming. Where do we draw the line? What's the difference between being frightened to stand in front of God's holy throne, because we talk about the Melech on Rosh Hashanah and crowning the Melech, and what is the difference of positive Yirat Shamayim and anxiety, or a traumatic response to previous religious trauma?
Can I just
Or
stop you there for a second? Because the way you just phrased it, I think, is so edifying. There's so much clarity just in the way you phrased that question. What is the difference between legitimate yiras shamayim, awe of heaven or fear of heaven, which it's so... I value having this conversation with you because I don't have to explain to you that yiras shamayim is a positive thing. So, you're a person who appreciates, of course, yiras shamayim, awe of heaven or fear of heaven, is a good thing. It's a desirable thing. So you phrase the question, what's the difference between legitimate yiras shamayim and, now I'm forgetting the words you use, but something like, and anxiety. So like, yeah, what is the difference? Aren't they both feelings of fear? Like, and how do you know which one is which? And if you're trying to get rid of one and keep the other, how do you separate? And I just wanted to re-articulate that question that you said it very quickly and you passed over it. But I think a lot of people are like, yeah, like, I would love to hear that.
Well, this is the question. What is the difference between fear of heaven and fear of the world and my own existence, and being a shaking, pathological mess of a psychiatric patient? Obviously, it's not black and white, but I'd like to share a few simple thoughts that I think can be quite helpful. Yirat Shamayim brings you closer to God. Fear of heaven brings you closer to God. Pathological worrying about having done sins brings you further away from God. Fear of God in a healthy way, Yirat Shamayim, brings us closer to the ones we love, to our family members, to our neighbors and friends, our colleagues, our brothers in the army. And pathological worrying separates us from those who we want to connect with. I gave the caveat before that I'm not a Rebbe, so I'll just quote the fellow that I heard it from, Zofrona Livracha. It's in the Nesivo Shalom last week. He says that Yirat Shamayim that breaks a person is not Yirat Shamayim, that's Yetzer Hara. And the overlap between Yetzer Hara and pathological anxiety, diagnosis of a stress disorder, whether it's acute or post-traumatic stress, depression with ruminative and obsessive worrying. Those bring people to a dark place where they feel that they cannot connect to God. They feel that there's no place for them. And that's not Yiddishkeit. That's not Judaism. Certainly, that's not God the way that I understand him. God wants us to connect with him. And when we start to feel that there's no possible way to get back and to reestablish our spiritual connection with our Creator, certainly that's not a understanding of Judaism that I'm familiar with.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're advising to judge the feeling by the results, what it brings to. And specifically, you're saying, if the feeling brings me closer to Hashem, closer to others, then even if it's a feeling of awe or fear, it could be a positive feeling of fear. It's a motivator. But if it's bringing me to a feeling of despondency, despair, being too far gone, if it's bringing me into a place of isolation from others, then you're saying that fact itself clarifies that the emotion itself is not coming from a healthy place or a holy place.
Well, we know that fear is a good thing. Somebody who's not afraid of anything is going to get eaten by all sorts of tarantulas, snakes, and saber-toothed tigers. You know, the fellow who free climbed El Capitan without any ropes and just went up thousands of feet, he has a different amygdala. He has a different brain than many of us do, because fear is a healthy thing. It keeps us from getting into too much trouble. Now, when fear controls us and doesn't allow us to make our own decisions, when it pulls us away again from the ones we know and love and want to connect with, when it gives us physical symptoms of anxiety, palpitations, upset stomach, headaches, back pain, difficulty breathing, that's physical symptoms of overwhelming and pathological anxiety, which is different from the awe of heaven. Again, we translate fear of God, I think, incorrectly oftentimes. As I understand it, it's more of the awe of God, the understanding of the tremendous power, wisdom, and love that creates and is still creating and running this world.
Okay, now this is very helpful. I'm going to give you pushback from the perspective of somebody who probably could be listening right now, and they're saying, I hear you, and I hear how you're saying that there could be a positive yiras shamayim, there could be an awe of heaven, which is, rather than paralyzing, it's motivating. Rather than taking you to a dark place, it's actually bringing you into the light. Rather than causing you to isolate and feel shame and separateness, it's actually pushing you out into the world to be more involved in community and in service of Hashem. I hear the distinction. However, based on my experience, I can't go near it. It's too toxic. It's a slippery slope. I got to stay completely away from it. Have you ever heard that before? And if yes, or if not, even if no, what would you say to that?
I think that oftentimes patients that come to my office will use words that are commonly used in either a religious relationship or a psychiatric setting, and we have different definitions of them. So somebody will come into my office and say, I'm depressed. And my immediate response to that is, I know what depression means to me. Please tell me what depression means to you. So when somebody tells me, I can't go there, it's Tishrei, it's too overwhelming, I can't deal with all this, God is judging me stuff. So as a therapist, I'll say, explain to me what all that God is judging me stuff means to you. And
explain to me what it means to you theologically first, or emotionally, like how is it affecting you?
Well, first of all, my job is to be a bit quiet in the office and to just allow people to drive their own ship and to guide them, but in all senses, because when people have definitions that are getting them into trouble with different things, sometimes they need to talk to a rabbi to re-clarify what their understanding of a religious topic is, or religious laws might be. Perhaps they're being too strict. Perhaps they're in doom, gloom, and judgment by fiery brimstone, which again is not necessarily what our religion is about. And sometimes also in psychological ways, or in terms of relationships. When I have a patient who tells me, I should have never gotten married, I married a terrible person, you know that we get into a fight almost once a month. And I'll say, so you're having 29 great days a month? Again, so it's about perspective and understanding.
Okay, so the
So
person tells you, I can't handle it. The judgment thing, the minute I start to think about it, it just takes me to a very dark place, and it's toxic for me and it's triggering me. Okay, so take me back into that scenario. So you say to the person, what does that mean to you?
yeah, and the answer might be, all everybody ever talks about is about how we're going to roast in a fiery furnace for every single thing that we've done. One time I went ahead and I looked at this. One time I went ahead and I said that. One time forgot to bench and I didn't go back because I was already on the bus. And because of that, I'm going to have shindalids plowing my body over somewhere in a deep, dark, fiery place. And I'll say, well, who told you that's how it goes down? Because this sounds to me in many ways like a religious trauma. And I might say, you need a new chevra. Uh, you might need to do some research into other perspectives because not to knock anybody's observance or understanding of God and the cosmos, but it could be that for some people that's a very healthy understanding of Jewish philosophy and the way that it works, but for other people they might not be holding on that level. We know that as we get older, we go from reading the literal understanding of the Chumash to reading the Chumash with Rashi, and then to reading the Chumash with the Ibn Ezra and with the Sforno and other commentaries. And it's not for nothing that when you turn 40, you can start learning Hasidus and Kabbalah because people aren't ready for different things at different ages and at places in their life. And when a person is stuck with an understanding that is traumatizing for them, it's time to explore other understandings, again, within a framework that, of course, is culturally appropriate. But that's why Rebbe, you and I were in contact in the first place, is because I just wanted to reach out to tell you how much the positivity and the love that you teach speaks to so many of my patients, and I had Carcito for that, but also for myself. A little bit of positivity didn't hurt anybody.
I like that. That's good. We can
And
put that
and
on a
but
coffee
Rebbe,
mug.
we would call this cognitive reframing, which
Okay, cognitive
is
reframing.
a powerful tool in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is looking for other perspectives that are also true and looking for where I've made mistakes in the way that I'm viewing a situation in order to have a more complete understanding of the situation where maybe uh, my situation isn't as horrendous as I thought it is, where maybe not everybody's trying to get me, where maybe it's not so black and white, whereby because I've done something that I aren't not particularly proud of, that now I'm in trouble for life. Rather, that there might be still a situation whereby I could write my life. That's the black and white thinking of addicts as well. I just relapsed, and so there goes my 921 days of sobriety, so I might as well
Right.
go on a bender and go back to using crack cocaine and living on the streets. Black and white thinking is a very pathological thing.
So cognitive reframing, and from your perspective, that means when it involves these Yiddishkeit issues, encouraging people to go back to their studies, maybe speak with a rabbi, get a more expansive view of the subject. I think
I would
that's
also say, though,
yeah.
Rebbe, sometimes, so often, uh, a Rav, a Mashkiach, the Magid Shir, Shoel Meshiv, a person who's in a teaching position will say something that maybe wasn't meant to be taken literally, or maybe was misheard or misinterpreted, or maybe wasn't for that exact Talmud to hear. And so oftentimes, if possible, I'll encourage actually my patients to reconnect with the person who gave them those ideas and to say, is this what you meant? Because this is what I took from it. And I don't know if I was supposed to take that from it. I don't think that you meant to tell me literally go and smash my phone, my computer, my television today. I don't know if you meant to literally tell me I should zip my mouth and close my eyes. I don't know if you literally meant to tell me that I need to quit my job immediately and go move to Morristown to join a kollel. So I think that encouraging patients to explore the grayness between their black and white thinking is absolutely a critical part of the healing process.
Do you find that black and white thinking is a common source of this religious anxiety, or it's just one of many causes? Or do you think there's like a recurring theme here?
Well, black and white thinking is anxiety because anxiety is fight or flight. The amygdala identifies
Right,
threats and it
right,
identifies not threats.
right. So it's
So,
either a
and
threat
that's
or
a
it's not
gift
a
that
threat.
God gave
And
us.
if it's a threat, then it's like life and death.
It has
But
to be because
right, it
that's what a
has to be.
threat is. A threat
Right.
is life and death. So
So
it's
it's not
about
assessing the degree of threat. It's just saying we got to run for our lives.
correct. And
Mhm.
the therapeutic process is not only about uh, making people aware of the situation that they're entering into fight or flight mode, but also
Mhm.
teaching people to realize that some of the things that they thought were threats weren't necessarily threats after all. So
Mhm.
that's what we do with patients who are afraid that their heart isn't working and they're having a heart attack. And we take their pulse, and I have a stethoscope in my office as well as a blood pressure machine. And I examine them and I say, I actually think you're healthy. Thank God. And so, normal feelings that you're having of your heart beating, of course, your heart's beating. That's why
Mhm.
we're able to have a conversation.
Mhm.
So, to answer your question, though explicitly, black and white thinking is a problem. It's not just a problem in this situation, it's a problem in all situations. There are very few things that are only right or only wrong. Now, we can think of many of them, but most of the time, people are not wondering, should I bow down to this idol or not? Should I
Right.
kill this person or not?
Right.
It's more an intense stress that has been identified as a life or death situation. And as a result of it, people aren't thinking clearly and their
Mhm.
bodies are under attack.
I feel like one of the biggest areas of the black and white thinking taking over, and tell me what you have to say about this, is when it comes to identity. What I mean by that is taking a behavior that I've done and generalizing that to define my entire status and worth as a human being, as a Jew, as everything. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So, I oftentimes will discuss with my patients and their families that, we are the sum of a whole. So we're not one action or even one habit or even many actions because many actions are not 20 years of one's life. We're not also one thought that I had because many people get very overwhelmed by their thoughts and
Mhm.
reminding our patients and our Hasidim, our Talmidim, that I am not my thoughts. Um, I'm not going to be held accountable for a random thought that goes through my head because that's not uh, that's not Judaism. Uh, in our tradition, there's
Okay, but
always a
let's
way.
say just to up the ante here and make it a little bit harder to answer. Let's say it is a full-fledged behavior. I used my free choice. Not only did I do it, I've done it repeatedly, and it's a certain weakness, and it's a behavioral thing. It's not an impulse. I've acted on it. I've repeatedly acted on it, and based on that, I'm categorizing myself as a worthless person, someone who is beyond repair and who is not worthy for a good new year. Like,
So thank
I
you
know
for
how I
pushing
would,
me into
I
a
know how I
corner.
would talk through that from a religious standpoint. I'm wondering how you would do that cognitive reframing, as you call it, from a mental health perspective.
Well, this is really important. And Mamish, thank you for painting me into a corner because I want to defend this. I was once asked, am I always optimistic when somebody books an appointment and comes in? And the answer is if they book the appointment out of their own volition. Because when somebody else shoves you into a room, we should have reasonable expectations. But when I have a patient who sought me out, who books an appointment, who comes in, has a list of questions and thoughts, I am always optimistic. Why? Because they believe that there is a problem and they believe that there is a solution. And I have to believe myself, both as a Jew, but also as a clinician, that people's lives can always get better. We might not be able to fix everything, although we see medical miracles of people with spinal cord injuries walking again with all sorts of machines and electrodes and interesting things. But we have to believe that people's lives can get better. So I'm always optimistic because by the time you show up, you've done so many things to say, I believe that there's a way to change, and you have motivations for changing. In the mental health field, we call this the concept of motivational interviewing, that it's the job of the clinician to find to help the patient find their motivation for change. So by the time you've shown up of your own volition, you have plenty of different motivations. Maybe it's a relationship with your spouse, your parents, your kids. Maybe it's challenges at work. Maybe it's challenges spiritually. Whatever it is, you are motivated to make a change. The first step in the 12 steps of recovery is recognizing that I have a problem. So you can't do anything unless you know you have a problem. There's plenty of people walking around outside who are in all sorts of trouble, not just with addictions, but plenty of people who don't realize how depressed they are. And they think it's normal just to not leave their house for a month at a time because, I have Amazon Prime. There are plenty of people who don't realize how pathological their anxiety is and that they're still using wipes to open up door handles. There are plenty of people who don't realize how angry they are. And recognizing that things are not working out and the hope that a person has for change makes me tremendously optimistic. So when people will come in and say there's no way out, absolutely not. The fact that you came in means there is a way out.
So
Otherwise,
basically, what you're
stupid.
saying to me is that you're building a rational case based on evidence, evidence from the person's own behaviors to refute that self-defeating argument that I'm beyond hope. Well, apparently you yourself don't even believe that because you've come to me.
Correct. And you do the same thing, Harav, when people come to you to say there's no way I can go back to yeshiva. There's no way I could ever start keeping Shabbos again. There's no way that I could ever return to my community. There's no way I could fix my relationship with my wife, my kids. Of course there is, or they wouldn't have come to you.
Sure. The way that I look at it, it's interesting that you're saying this because I do this intuitively. I always try to identify even the slightest positive thing the person is already doing. And the reason I do that is not because I'm trying to let's look on the bright side and let's emphasize the positive. That's not actually why I do it. The reason that I do it, and I do this intuitively, although it's informed by my study of Torah, that's why I believe that it's a correct approach. And I would love to hear more from you about whether you agree with this. But basically, to me, the premise is mitzvah gereres mitzvah, like it says in Pirkei Avos, that one mitzvah causes another mitzvah. So there's a principle, and I don't want to say the negative part, but yes, the rest of the sentence is avero gereres avero, that a sin will cause another sin. There's a concept of momentum. And so therefore, I feel like getting a boulder that's sitting there to start moving Like you could push and push. It's very hard to get it to start moving. But if it's already moving, even ever so slightly, just starting to roll, then you can get behind it and push it, and then eventually it picks up speed. So if you can identify where somebody is already exhibiting some level of motivation, some level of hope, some level of being proactive, and you can get behind that, meaning you're not trying to create it from whole cloth. It already exists, even if it's small, but it exists. And then you can build momentum behind it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you? Is that what?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I tell my patients oftentimes is, okay, scale of 1 to 10. 10 means we're changing everything immediately. You're going to be tremendously successful, no sweat. And, 1 meaning nothing is changing. How likely are you to stop drinking? How likely are you to stop getting into altercations with your neighbor? How likely are you to start taking a medicine that would be required to grease the wheels to facilitate a therapeutic process? And oftentimes my patients will tell me a 2, a 2.5. And so my response to that is, yes, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, no, Doc, you misheard me. I didn't say an 8. I said a 2. And I'll say, but that's amazing because you could have said 1.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, but I still said 2. I'll say, well, 2 is different than 1. How is 2 different than 1? And it's about watering that sprout and putting on some fertilizer and making sure the sunlight shines in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's absolutely critical to talk about past successes and to get people moving. Now, I always tell my patients to keep a journal. And in many times, when I'm working with a new patient, I'll tell them, unless you're going to keep a journal, I'm probably not the right person for you
Mm.
because I need you so invested in this that you're really keeping track of how things are going. So oftentimes they'll tell me, well, I can't keep a journal. I've tried, I'll do it for like a week, I'll do it for a day, or it's so boring or it's so overwhelming. And I'll say, well, you keep a journal anyways. You keep a scorecard in your head of every terrible thing you've ever done. You can tell me
Oh, that's
about when
good.
you were 8 and all the terrible strikeouts you had in Little League and every time you
Uh-huh.
got embarrassed. I'll
Uh-huh.
say, just write down one good thing a day. And then
Mm-hmm.
this helps with cognitive reframing because when
Mm-hmm.
it's, I'm a terrible person, but wait a minute, you have all these good things that you've done. After 30 days, we have 30 good things, even if
You
you're
don't
only
tell them
writing
that they
down
can
one.
only write down positive things. When you're saying journaling, you don't mean that they can only write down positive things.
Correct. But I also encourage them to have a special section of here was a thing I'm proud of every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that my Rosh Kollel, Rabbi Naftali Beer, tells all of the Avrechim to do in his Kollel. Write down some positive things that you've done every day. Now,
Mm.
this actually helps with another CBT tool, another tool in cognitive behavioral therapy called positive self-talk. Because the average anxious, obsessive, ruminative, depressive, frustrated person is walking around with a loop in their head of, I'm a terrible person. I bothered my wife. She'll never forgive me. I bothered my neighbor. He hates me now. I can't go back to shul. I got fired from that job. I'll get fired
Mm-hmm.
from this job. And they're just walking around with a terrible loop of awful thoughts. So when we get in the habit of thinking about something we did that we're proud of, when we get in the habit of writing down something objectively good that we did today, even if it's just I brushed my teeth twice for the first time in forever,
Mm-hmm.
you're in the habit of saying good things and thinking good things. And that's positive self-talk. It's about breaking that loop and putting in a new tape recording of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm not the worst guy ever. Hey, there's a chance that I
Mm-hmm.
could turn it around.
And so could you, taking this approach, I'm just wondering if you could um, expand this and say like this. Tell me what you think of this. Somebody says, I have terrible anxiety. I'm going to be standing in shul on Rosh Hashanah with nothing, and I'm gonna have a terrible year. And perhaps the cognitive reframing is, where are you going to be standing? In shul? Ah, so you already showed up. That's something. That's something. You got something going for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing, though, is about asking them what they're doing when they're standing in shul, because it
Hmm.
could be that they're engaged in things that have been traumatic for them in the past or have been painful or frustrating, and trying to come up with alternatives that are equally engaged within the community, equally engaged spiritually, but that don't have negative connotations to them. So
Could you
whether
speak
it's
about that a little bit more specifically when you say they could be in shul engaged in things that have traumatic associations? Could you just like spell that out a little bit more clearly for us?
so it could be that there are some people who need to go to a different shul because all they remember about being in that shul was either being around an abuser or being yelled at and smacked at by somebody who sat in the row with them,
I think
or
this is
they
extremely
remember.
common for people who daven in the shul where they grew up. I mean, first of all, just a major disclaimer. Some people have wonderful emotional associations with the shul where they grew up. It does happen to plenty of people. But yeah, so like I very often if someone's going to the shul where they grew up, and I want to talk to you in 1 minute, I want to pivot our conversation to talk about family dynamics during Tishrei when the high holidays cause us to like interact so much with our family members. But that's a common scenario. Like an adult who's going home to the parents and now they're going to the family shul where they grew up and they can't really tell anyone, or maybe they themselves can't articulate it because they don't even consciously understand why there's this dread, and yet it's because in part at least some association with that environment of that particular shul. I mean, that I've definitely heard many, many, many times. So I think that's something that a lot of people listening probably would be curious to hear your take on.
So certainly it can remind us of all sorts of things that we've done that we're not proud of, and things that other people have done to us that they should not be proud of. Going back to these environments that bring up a lot of negative emotions. So uh, obviously, we don't want to run away. Ideally, we want a curative process. A full therapeutic process is not being unable to engage within one's life. It's about feeling comfortable in one's shoes, engaging in the life that they live. Um,
Mhm. So
so,
you're saying
so
ideally you would, for instance, if a patient of yours were going through precisely this challenge, your ultimate ideal goal would be like, I would love to see you being able to go back to that shul where you have those associations and being able to have a positive experience there in spite of the.
I think that that could certainly be a goal, and it should be on the table as the
Mhm.
ultimate curative process. Rabbi Twersky Zatzal oftentimes spoke about how the alcoholic who's in recovery, who refuses to go to weddings, is not actually in such a great recovery, because if you can't be around other people who are drinking, how strong is your sobriety?
Right. Sure.
In the same sense, I think that it is worthwhile to have a discussion about other things that can be done. Just
Mhm.
Lamaisa, is there a book that you could bring to Shul that you're really engaged with that is talking
Mhm.
about the high holidays?
Mhm.
Is there a specific safer that you could get engaged with? Is there a safer you could learn in advance that would
Mhm.
inspire you? This is what Rav Milas Biederman Shlita does for so many of us over here in Eretz Yisrael and across the world, is giving us specific understanding, specific voice that maybe we hadn't thought about, that are frankly very inspiring. Is there a way that you could prepare emotionally with your family and just say, Dad, I'm happy to go back to shul with you, but just keep in mind, I can't be there for 15 hours.
Mhm.
That's not where I'm at right now. And
Mhm.
setting the stage for success. Sometimes it's about
Mhm.
actually engaging family in a family discussion before. But uh, I would like to hope that most people could discuss what was so distressful
Mhm.
in the past, and then also ask, what is it really as bad as you thought that it was? Because again,
Mhm.
part of cognitive framing is not, it wasn't you had the worst experience of your life every single time you were in that building. There's no
Right.
way that's the case. I mean,
Right.
everybody's been to the
But
RMP
some
before.
experiences are so intense, even if it happened once, then it can make it
Of
very
course.
difficult, yeah, to be in that place.
Of course. And, that might be a situation whereby it's not appropriate for a person to head back.
Hmm.
So just really exploring this and creating, therapy is a safe place, ideally, to explore this. And frankly, engaging also with a competent poisek, with a Rav, to see what are the options, what is
Hmm.
appropriate based
Right.
on a person's experience. I'm certainly not giving people religious hadracha. I'm giving them questions to ask the right person
Hmm.
to approach.
Sure, sure. And that's so important because I mean, I know so many instances where people seek guidance and they end up being, even by, unfortunately, therapists who come from a religious background, they end up being given guidance that is not spiritually helpful because it sort of just assumes that the mental health piece of it trumps all, and they don't check it out and make sure that what they're doing is correct. And the truth is, in many cases, rabbanim who understand mental health are willing to be very, very lenient. But there's a huge difference between just doing something, well, my therapist told me and that's it, and I'm dropping this. And on the other hand, going to a Rav, a Paisik, who can come up with a plan for you where maybe the bottom line is the behavior will be identical whether you had gone to the Rav or not, but now you're doing it with rabbinic guidance, and we have to believe that there's a certain koyach haTorah to that makes it healthier for us spiritually, which ultimately, if it's spiritually healthier, it's going to be mentally and emotionally healthier. So it's really important that you're saying that you do this, and I want everyone who's listening to realize that that should be their expectation in a therapeutic setting as well, that should be honored. And I mean, I'll use a word that I think has currency even in a secular setting, which is cultural sensitivity. It
Yeah,
is
it's
simple
cultural
cultural
competency.
sensitivity to tell a religious Jew, ask a Rav.
It's cultural competency is required to practice within a specific ethnic group or religious community that has specific understandings of the way that the world works. It's not fair. I'll never forget when I had a patient in the emergency room, a Haitian fellow who was being voodooed by some of his neighbors. And he had
Just as back in
found
the
himself,
States.
well, not in Eretz Yisrael currently, but as a
Right.
trainee, I was running the
This is
emergency
in
room
Boston, or
in Boston.
uh-huh.
And there was a fellow, a Haitian fellow, who had armed himself because he was convinced that his neighbors were voodooing him.
Putting
And
a
I
hex on him.
remember
Yeah.
I explained to the med student, I said, you know, we need to call his brother, because if his brother says the neighbors are voodooing them,
Mm.
then we're going to handle this a lot differently than if his brother
Wow.
says, by the way, this guy has schizophrenia.
I
So
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
having a cultural competency
By
and
the way, I'm
obtaining
so
Bible,
curious. I'm so curious. What did the brother say?
he was actually a psychiatrist at a local hospital, and he was the guardian of his brother. So he said, please admit him to the hospital.
Right.
He's
There's
offered
no
this medicine, this poor fellow. Nobody's voodooing him next
uh-huh.
door. They're
Uh-huh.
actually Episcopalians. They don't even know how to do that stuff.
But you asked, and that because you asked, you were able to treat this patient the way that he deserves to be treated. That's amazing. Okay, hold on. I want to go into a whole other thing. I teased it before, and now I want to go back to it. I want to talk about family dynamics because there's a lot of stuff that is touched off by the heightened level of exposure to family members during high holidays, and also returning to places and settings that have to do with our growing up. There's so much I have to say about that. I have some questions about it, but maybe I'll just throw it to you as a general topic and tell me your first thoughts about it.
To go back to the Nesiva Shalom from last week, he brings up the parsha where he's talking about the king having his own Sefer Torah that he carries around with him, as well as the one that he has at home. And he says that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, and each one of them corresponds to a specific soul, and everybody has their place in the Torah, but everybody's place is different. And even if it's the same letter, the same lamed, or the same lamed and the same word, but just somewhere else, knowing that everybody has their own unique spiritual path is something so important for families as they get together. And I would say that everybody's on their own path, and to respect that. Again, if somebody's sitting on the side of the road smoking a joint, that's not being on your own path. That's actually neglecting following your own both spiritual path and path of being a responsible adult. But I think it's so critical for people to remember, for parents, for kids, that parents shouldn't judge kids in the same way kids shouldn't judge their parents. We all have
let
our
me
own path.
just interject here to say this really super clearly so that everyone knows what we're talking about, because you're speaking about it very delicately. But and I myself want to clarify. You're talking about a family getting together, a large family where you have different households, maybe married children who are now coming back to the home. Either they're staying with their parents or they're having meals together. But you're talking about different families. And then, of course, you have the single children who are not married and have their own homes, but now maybe they were away at yeshiva and now they're home, and they're all coming under one roof. And what you're saying is, in one family, there may be different levels or types of Jewish observance going on. I just want to ask you, that's what you're saying.
Of course there will be, but
okay, but hold on, you're taking that for
together,
granted. I want to tell you something. You're saying that of course there will be. I want to tell you, many people look at it the opposite. Of course, everyone in one family is doing the same thing, keeping the same level, has the same standards, answers to the same authorities. So I think that needs to be unpacked a little bit more slowly here, because your of course is not, I don't think it's consistent with a lot of people's experiences.
Let me tell you another Boston story. There were two brothers who both were in the emergency room needing to get stitched up. One had punched the other one in the eye, and there was a laceration there. Another one had hit his brother in the head with a beer bottle, and that fellow needed stitches here.
Was this the Three Stooges?
The third brother had gone like that. But what had happened between the nice Boston Irish American family is that they were watching the Red Sox game and drinking.
Right.
And one said they should leave the pitcher in. He's much better than the relief pitcher. And the other one said, he's terrible and he's blowing the game. Bring in the relief pitcher. First guy looks at the second guy, bam. The second guy picks up a bottle, pop.
Right.
These are people who love the Red Sox. Nobody's arguing. We all love the Red Sox. We all love baseball here. But everybody does it even slightly different. It's never exactly the same because it can't be. Even identical twins are different.
Wow. That is a wonderful marshal. We're all Red Sox fans here. Yeah. So unpack that a little bit, what that might look like, as far as, I would love to believe that parents are listening to you and are trying to figure out how to create a more tolerant, inclusive environment in the home. But my assumption is that, unfortunately, that's not as common as probably the scenario that's more common, which is someone's listening to it and being like, I'm the one going home who's about to be branded the black sheep. I'm so afraid of the pressure, the scrutiny. So I almost feel like let's talk to the person who's afraid of walking into that pressure cooker. Like, what can you do for them?
Well, let's actually talk to the parents.
Okay, all right.
If you were a mom or a dad and you knew that your kid was sitting in my office or the office of a colleague of mine crying, saying, I can't go home. It's terrible. I can't believe this is what it's going to be like. And we're talking about a person who doesn't have a serious mental illness, perhaps. We're talking about somebody who doesn't have a serious addiction. We're talking about somebody who's on the derech, somebody who wakes up, prays, davens, does all these things that they're supposed to do, and looks like a relatively healthy person.
Okay.
And if their parents knew how terrified they were, I would hope that their parents would really look in that mirror, look in the spiritual mirror, and say, I really have to change the amount of pressure that I'm putting on my kids. No parent in our community, in any community, who's a reasonably healthy person, who's interested in growing as a person and being their best self, which is what Elul and Tishrei are all about, is going to want to be responsible, even partly for having created an
Yeah, but
environment like
doctor,
that. For
I wanna push back here. The parent is
push back,
afraid.
came me into a corner.
Okay, the parent is saying, all right, you're telling me my son, who's a wonderful yeshiva bacher, is sitting in your office crying because he's terrified about going home. And I hear that, and I don't want to make my child cry, but I want to tell you something. I'm afraid, as a parent, I'm afraid for him. I don't want him to do anything that will damage him spiritually. I don't want him to do anything that will bring stigma and judgment upon him. I hear what you're saying. I don't want my child to feel that type of pressure. I'm trying to protect my child.
So, first of all, I would say this is a great question for a parent to have with their Rav, with the mental health professional as well. Ideally, there's a relationship that the patient has provided a waiver of confidentiality to speak with the family to discuss such an issue. And if not, it could be that the parents need to be in their own therapeutic process, whether, again, that's with a rabbi or with a therapist who specializes in hadrachat horim, guiding parental guidance. I would say further that by the time a kid is that old, that they're in their own therapeutic process and that they're able to vocalize their distress. Parents are no longer in a place where they can force their kids to do anything. So we can break parenting into unpaid babysitter, where you're changing diapers and helping your kid get his socks on and tie his shoes. And then the other stage is that of the trusted advisor, whereby the parent is there to support their child to grow and to achieve the child's goals, which again are guided by the parents. But by the time your child is in late teens and late 20s, pressure might solve an issue in the moment, but it definitely is going to have a rebound effect. It's just simply not going to be the most successful means of interacting and of guiding one's children.
Mhm.
I know that I said a lot of stuff here, and I know about bad therapy and Abby Schreier's book, and it's good stuff. And I know that that you have thoughts that you want to expand upon here, and I want you to push me on it, or I'm looking forward to what's going to come out of that brilliant cup of yours, Rebbe.
No, I agree with you. Uh, I wish that more parents were even asking these questions. The reality is that the parents who are sensitive enough to even ask the questions are probably not the same parents who are creating an environment that's causing their children to cry with dread of coming home. So it's almost like the parents who need to hear this are never going to hear it. Now, I know that's stinking thinking, and I'm being a pessimist, and I don't mean it that abjectly, but um, and I do want to say that I've spent a great deal of my time and energy, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, working with parents. Of course, I work with parents who have sought me out. So that shows that they're motivated already. They're already good parents and want to become even better. Um, Maybe I'm a cynic, but I'm feeling like for most people who are dreading being home this Tishrei, they are the ones who are going to have to do the work, and the parents are not going to accommodate. So look, I hope somebody listening to what you said will be moved, and I'm sure somebody will. And even if one parent is moved, it was worth it. I would love to hear more though, because practically I just think this is more commonplace about the person who feels like going home is walking into a war zone.
Okay.
And I want to talk about two levels of it. I want to talk about it religiously, like you were saying about different levels or types of observance under one roof in one family. Then I want to talk about it completely apart from the religious aspect of it, which is just the emotional dynamic of different types of relationships. But so let's talk to the person who's, let's say, either they're a single person or maybe they're married, and then that's even more complicated because they're bringing their spouse, they're bringing their children. What do we say to this person to arm them to be ready to have a pleasant Yom Tov and a pleasant family time under these conditions? Let's first hone in on the religious tension, and then let's talk about other sources of tension.
So what I'm first thinking about is having watched a road rage incident that unfurled in front of me about a month ago. I was in the States and I saw a fellow bump into the person in front of him. He then got out of the car, was screaming, and eventually put his hand through the driver's side window. The guy was probably an accountant, a dentist, a doctor, or a lawyer. Uh, Probably had a family based on the type of car he was driving. We can make both of those assumptions because it was uh, believe a Lexus SUV with a kid seat in the back. I just saw this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, when he apologizes for this and said, I have no idea where that came from.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just got stressed out. That's not a true statement because we know exactly where this came from. It wasn't a bad moment. It wasn't a bad hour. It wasn't a bad day. It wasn't a bad week, month, year. It's bad decades. Because by the time somebody is acting in such a fashion, uh, where they're smashing things, yelling, screaming, saying, I hate everything, I hate everybody, I can't do this. By the time those things are happening, it's been building for a long time. There's been bad relationships that need fixing for a long time. There's been bad coping skills that need to be replaced with healthy coping skills for a long time. These are people who aren't eating healthy and aren't sleeping healthy and are putting stuff in their body that doesn't belong there by the time it erupts in such a fashion. So, what I try and teach my patients to do is to be aware of how they're feeling. Uh, Most people are not aware of how angry they are. They just are walking around with clenched fists and periodically yell out. Most people are not aware of how depressed they are. They're just suffering in silence. Most people are not aware of how anxious they are. They're just jumpy. And teaching my patients mindfulness, which again, for the classic definition is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the moment in a non-judgmental way, checking in with yourself, seeing what am I actually feeling right now? What am I experiencing? And engaging my patients in that as we talk about their challenges and going home, as well as teaching them to be aware when they're walking through the door and are mamish entering the lion's den. Once they start to feel that they're getting dysregulated, because we can teach people to feel the signs and symptoms, both cognitively and physically, we can diffuse a situation before it even starts. And I think so much of this is about people spending time with themselves and not getting distracted. So I actually had a fellow who came into my office, not for me, to sit with one of my colleagues who was late in the moment. And he asked me, how can I stop comparing myself to everybody? And I said, have you ever compared yourself to yourself? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, have you ever sat with yourself and thought about how you're doing? And he said, I do sometimes, but it always goes back to somebody else. I said, well, when was the last time that you were just by yourself? And he said, well, like I walked to the yeshiva. And I said, with your phone or without your phone? He said, I don't have a smartphone. I said, with your MP3 or without your MP3? He said, well, sometimes I listen to music. I said, well, are you Hazri Mishnayos as you're doing this? He said, yeah. So I pegged him. I said, when was the last time that you just sat with yourself, though, and thought about how you're doing? I actually was inspired by this discussion and went out for a hike by myself today, somewhere deep in the Jordan Valley. And I just went for like a 5 mile hike. It was me and a couple of eagles. I saw some deer. I actually saw a fox, which means he might have been rabid. So that's a bit concerning. But he stayed away from me. And as I was walking, I was just thinking about, where am I at? It's Chodesh Elul. I'm walking in the middle of a field, looking for the Melech and looking for myself. Where am I? And am I doing what I should be doing? Am I practicing what I'm preaching? Am I connecting with myself and actually thinking about, was this a good year? What should the next year look like? Am I holding on to anger? Am I holding on to unhappiness? Am I holding on to fear? And being aware that it's okay that we all have some frustration, we all have some anger, we all have some sadness, and we all have some fear. But trying to pay attention to whether or not that's impacting the decision making that I have. And as I was there, it was an experience of me and me. So this is what I recommended to that young bacher: was sit with yourself and actually look at yourself without all these distractions. I mean, we're not talking about phone addictions or not phone addictions. We're just talking about if you're doom scrolling on YouTube Shorts or whatever it might be, if you're checking statuses all day long, or even if you're just listening to your favorite songs on repeat, you're not really checking in with yourself. And when we are in a mode whereby we are aware of our internal state, we can catch it before it comes, before I get into a yelling match with my family over the table, before I start to say, I'm too afraid I can't even walk home, before I start to say, I hate my life, I'm so depressed, it's never going to change, before I get into that dark zone, which is a spiral that continues, I can check in and say, what do I need to do to act according to my values, as opposed to acting according to my emotions? What do I need to do to process this distress that I'm feeling in order to be the kind of person that I want to be for me, not because somebody else is doing it? And I think that ideally, for people that are interested in creating such a household, I would hope that parents will do the same thing and say, what kind of a home do I want my kids to be returning to? And to being aware of their fears, of who might be judging them or who might be judging their kids, their anger over their kids making different decisions, or their sadness over the way things have turned out, and trying to right the ship if possible, and if not, at least not to be overwhelmed by it when parents have the opportunity to reconnect with their kids. Dafka at the most holy time of the year, when we're supposed to be in awe in a positive way, not overwhelmed by fear in a negative way.
So plug this in very specifically to the teen or 20 something, or could even be somebody who's 30, 40, 50, walking into the family dynamic, and they are very anxious about, let's first just talk about religious conflict. What do you tell this person? I'm hearing what you're saying about the mindfulness and making sure that what you're going to be doing is in accordance with your values and not in accordance with your emotions or your emotional reactions. But give guidance to this person who's concerned that they're going to walk into a situation that's going to, something's gonna light a fuse and the powder keg's gonna explode. What do you tell them?
One exercise that I do like to do with my patients is to have them write a letter to their parents. Now, whether or not they end up giving that letter to their parents or to their children is not as relevant as much as what are the feelings that you would like to express in a way that you believe it will be heard in a productive manner to create understanding and respect. And again, whether or not the letter is actually shared or whether or not it even works out, it at least allows a person to take stock of what they're hoping things will look like. And I encourage people to hold the foundation. Make sure, young man, you get enough sleep. Make sure that you're eating healthy. Make sure you're not putting substances in your body. You make sure that you're not too stressed out when you walk in the door, because then you'll be more likely to erupt. So there are those practical things. But one of the other things that we have to talk about frequently is that not everybody's healthy, unfortunately. And sometimes it's not my patients who are the unhealthy people, it's their spouse or it's
That's
their
precisely what I'm talking about. That's
parent or kids.
Yeah. And by the way, let me just ask, because I'm not familiar with the statistics. I don't want to put you on the spot. Maybe you don't know the numbers either, but what are the numbers? Like, what percentage of the general population has some type of mental health issue? Whether, even a simple neurosis or personality disorder. What percentage are we talking about?
So there's a lot of numbers out there.
Give me a couple numbers.
Sure. So one of the best ones is 1 in 3. 1 in 3 people
1 in
will
3.
struggle
Okay,
with.
so let's go with the 1 in 3. You're going to a big frum family, 30 family members. So that means 10 people, 10 people. If this is an average family, 10 people are dealing with something.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Right, yeah. So with
don't
that
forget, Rabbi, though, that
mind, well, I want to present the question in terms of, okay, I'm walking into a situation where there are a lot of people. I love them. They're my family. I'm going home, but there's a lot of people who are not well, and I have a history with them. It's not just like you describe being in a hospital setting where you meet somebody who's mentally unwell. No, I have decades of history with this person, of patterns that have been established where those patterns were established in part by the way this other party is unwell. Also, I'll own my part of it, how I've been unwell. So I'm going into a situation where there's a lot of people with a lot of stress, a lot of issues, a lot of history, a lot of patterns. Like, this is a formula for some type of disaster. Help me mitigate the odds of things getting bad.
Superman recharges in the fortress of solitude. That's where he sits by himself and he meditates, and he does that before he goes out to save the world. So sometimes we can do that on a hike in the Jordan Valley. Sometimes we can do that meditating in our own room. Sometimes we just have to, again, take stock of ourselves and breathe deeply. And knowing that it's okay to say no is very important. Knowing that it's okay to say, I can't come for all of Sukkot. That's too many days for me to be living here. That's much healthier than trying to schlep it out and waiting until things explode.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for people to know their own boundaries. And again, that gets back to the critical need to discuss with a rabbi and with the therapist, and for the rabbi and the therapist to collaborate, to come together with an answer. What should this person do if it's going to be an explosive, re-traumatizing situation at home? Don't forget, most patients have some sort of a genetic predisposition that they inherited from other people who have the same genes, mom and dad, siblings, uncles, aunts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's absolutely a challenge. And knowing when to say, this is a bad situation, I'm going to get into trouble here, you know, knowing when to say, I don't need another drink is what separates somebody from becoming an alcoholic and somebody from having a beer with their friends uh, before it degenerates into a Red Sox fist fight.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you one more thing. And it's a permutation of the scenario we've been discussing, but it's a scenario that's unfortunately, thank God it's not as common, but it definitely pertains to many people. And that is where, for now, and I'll use the word for now, they're not going to be able to be with family precisely because there's no way of making it manageable. And there's a lot of guilt associated with that. There's a lot of loneliness associated with that. What would you say to those people who are just not going to be able to make it work getting together with family this year?
Ooh, Gullis, we're still struggling with this. And this is one of the most ultimate Gullises. Um, I think that coming up with a plan to be engaged as an individual, whether or not one is going home is important. It's oftentimes people in early recovery come up with a sobriety plan. Who can I call? If it's the middle of the night and I'm feeling alone, do I have a sponsor? Do I have a place where I can go? What's my escape plan? So having a network of other people if one can't return home, so that way they don't necessarily feel alone. If one can't go uh, back to be with their family, they don't have to be alone. And especially if they want to be with other people. If they feel like they can't go back again to their family for all of the Chag or for the entire experience, thinking about what they can do. Because everybody can do something. Now, of course, this becomes a bit more complicated when we're dealing with issues of trauma. But oftentimes, when my patients have a lot of negative experiences in their life and have had traumatic experiences, uh, they'll have a voice in their head that says, you're a terrible person. I can't believe you're not going home. I can't believe you're not going to shul. I can't believe you're doing X, Y, and Z. And I'll encourage them to be aware of the fact that this is not necessarily their voice. You know, whose voice is that? Whose voice is the one that's criticizing you? And realizing that oftentimes whoever is saying those negative things in their head, that person is not a healthy person. And again, going back to cognitive reframing, realizing that not everything that's said in your direction, not every act that is against you is because you've done something wrong. It could be that other people are struggling. And when we're children, uh, we imagine that our parents are infallible, that they're tremendously wise and brilliant and have this great plan. And one of the scariest things that happens to people somewhere between the age of about 12 to 25, depending on the situation, is realizing that parents are people too, and they also make mistakes. And older brothers and older sisters and rabbis and teachers and aunts and uncles and presidents are also human beings. And recognizing that not everything that was said is still applicable or was ever applicable, and trying to process that through and to find good moments as well is what allows people to remove themselves from the black and white thinking of mental health and addiction, and rather to place themselves in a situation where they realize that there are good things out there and there is growth that I can do. And that in and of itself provides a person with motivation. You know, I'll just share an interesting chiddush before I beg you for yours to inspire me for the Yomim Noraim. But some of us are going to eat a fish and eat a fish's head on Rosh Hashanah. And we're going to say, make me a head and not a tail. Meaning, in the same sense, though, fish don't swim by themselves or they're liable to get eaten. Fish swim within the school. So it's good to be together. It's good to be part of something. It's good to be part of the community, part of the family. But I also have to blaze my own trail and be myself and find my own spiritual path. And I hope we should be zoche in that. But now you have to inspire me, Rabbi. I'm sorry, I talked way too much this time. Next time, I'm just going to listen.
I like listening. I'll tell you an inspiring thought. And I think it ties in to everything we've been speaking about, or a lot of it. And this is from the B'nai Yisachar. One of the main prayers that we say during the high holiday season, specifically during Yom Noraim, the days of awe, Sesime Tshuva, days of penitence, is Avinu Malkeinu. We refer to Hashem as our Father and as our King. So why do we refer to both of these titles? Now, Rosh Hashanah, the primary concept is Hashem's kingship. We ask Hashem, Malay Chala Olam Kulei, rule over the entire world. Rosh Hashanah is the Haftarah, is the coronation of the king. It's Hashem renewing his interest in being a king, in governing over his creation. But kings are also authorities, and there's some degree of rigidity that comes with that authority, to the extent that we're told that Melech HaMoichel al Kvoidei Ein Kvoidei Mochel, that a king who forgoes his honor still stands. He's not allowed to forgo his honor. In other words, it's the honor of the position. So really, by all rights, being that Hashem is a king, if somebody transgresses the edict of the king, meaning we don't do what we were told clearly in Shulchan Aruch to do, the king really can't help you. It's I'm very sorry, but Merida b'malchus. I mean, treason is a high offense, so high crime, and it's true. But the good news is that Hashem is Avinu Malkeinu. He's not just a king; he's our Father, the King, and of Hamoichel al Kavedei Machol, that a father and a mother, for that matter, who forego the honor due to them, even though it's one of the 10 commandments. Yes, kabedis avicha v'esimecha. We know that kibud avim is a mitzvah. It's not just a mitzvah. It's from the 10 commandments. We know that. Yes, yes, and yes. And nevertheless, a father and a mother have a power that a king doesn't have, which is they can forego the honor due to them. Now, they don't forgo the honor due to them because they're timid or because they're trying to win their child's approval or they're people pleasers. It's not coming from weakness. They forgo the honor due to them when that is the right thing for their ability to help their child. A parent's job is to help your child to grow, to move from level to level. And there are times when setting aside our honor is advantageous for our ability to do our job as parents and to help our children grow. So Hashem has that power. Hashem definitely is a humble king. He's a fatherly king. Hashem sets aside his honor and he allows us the ability to come back home time after time after time. And if we can emulate even a fraction of his compassion and his forgiveness, then I think there will be a lot more peace in everybody's homes.
Amen. Amen. Rebbe, you did not disappoint.
I know sometimes the expectations are hard to live up to, but you know what they say, that the cholent comes out in accordance with the guests. So if I said something that you liked, it's because you brought it out of me. If the cholent was good, it's because you are a great Shabbos guest, so to speak. So I'm glad you enjoyed. I certainly enjoyed. I really appreciate all of your insights and your experience. I'm sure people listening have enjoyed as well. And let's finish with a bracha to everyone for Ksiva V'Chsima Tova and a good gebencht Yor.
Good Yor, Shana Tova to everyone.